QuickBooks Pro Desktop 2021 Vendor Center. Let's get into it with Intuit's QuickBooks Pro Desktop 2021. We are in our Get Great Guitars practice file. We currently have the home page open. You can open the home page by going to the company dropdown and home page. We have the open windows open. You can open the open windows by going to the view dropdown and the open windows list. That'll give you a list of the windows that are open. As long as you have this icon open over here, you can collapse the open windows, in other words. And then remember that as we look at the open windows, we can maximize or minimize the open windows within QuickBooks system here. So I'm going to maximize the home page. So now we want to take a look at the vendor center. So we've taken a look at the flow of the vendor section and an overview of the forms within them. The vendors are people that eventually we will be paying. So the vendors, you want to think about them as people that we buy stuff from and people that we pay. Now, you might be saying, hey, we're a vendor, we sell stuff, right? And again, on the QuickBooks side of things, the vendor, you have to think about where you are in terms of QuickBooks terminology, and it depends on which side of the transaction you are. So yeah, we're a vendor that we sell stuff, but for QuickBooks, the vendor is the person that we pay, and then the customers are of course, the people that are going to pay us. So now we want to take a look at the vendor center, because when we think about the people that we're paying or the people that we're buying stuff from, then we have to have actual people, right? The vendors. We have to set up the vendors and think about them individually. We can do so a few different ways, one with reports and one with the vendor center, two ways that can help us to navigate what we owe to the vendors and our transactions related to them. You can get to the vendor center multiple different ways. One is you can go to the home page and just click on this icon up top, which will take you to the vendor center. I typically like to use the drop down because, again, no matter what window you are in, you'll have the drop down here, so then it's always available to you. Drop down vendors, and then the top one is the vendor center. So within the vendor center, we have the vendors that are going to be laid out. I'm going to minimize this open window screen so we have as much space as possible now. We have the vendors that are going to be listed out here. So these are the vendors that we used in our practice problem. We will create these vendors when we do the second half of the course. We will actually start to pay these vendors, and this thing will be populated as we go. Now, if you click on any particular vendor, it's going to give you basically a list here that gives you a kind of a quick list of who we owe money to, meaning they've billed us in some way, shape, or form, and we haven't yet paid it, so we're going to have to be paying that at some point in the future. Now, notice we worked this practice problem in 2021, so I'm gonna change the year here to, in my case, the next fiscal year, to change the dates to 2021, and then you can see the transactions. So this is one way we can get to more detail about the transactions that we have with any particular person that we buy stuff from or people that we pay, however you want to think of it. And then we can go to the transactions that will be listed here. Transactions we'll think about next time, transactions that will be found in the vendor cycle in the home page that we took a look at last time, including things like bills and things like checks. Now we can set up a new vendor here by going to the drop down, and we'll do this when we start to work through the practice problem. Drop down and add new vendors, or we can add multiple vendors. We will go through that practice problem or that process when we start the new company file. You can also create a new vendor, and this is probably how most of the vendors will be created. You create a new vendor when you create the form in which that you are inputting into the system. In other words, when you create the bill or you create the check, you can basically add the vendor at that point in time. Note that when you're adding the vendors, you typically don't need a lot of information. I don't need to know everything about them. All I want to know is basically, their name, what to put on the check, or how to pay them, so that I can then record the fact that I paid them and that I'm tracking that information in our system. Now, some of the major vendors, like our major vendors, will be the people that we purchase stuff from. That will be like we purchase guitars in our case. So we might want a lot more information about who the contact person, contact number, and just normal contact information. On the customer side, then of course we want as much contact information as possible, so we can communicate any way we can, give them our newsletter and that kind of stuff. If we go to the second tab up top, we'll have our information by transaction. And you'll note that these transactions will be similar to what we have seen in the flow on the vendor side. So if I open up our window and I go to the home page, you'll note that these forms here are the types of forms that we would see in the vendor section that are the types of forms that could involve the vendors. And so if I go to the vendors center and I go to the transactions, you'll see another kind of breakout of lists of these types of forms, and then the forms that has been generated on the right-hand side. So this is just another way kind of to navigate through this. We'll see similar type of information if I go back to the first tab in terms of the vendors and who we owe the vendors to when we generate reports. So if I'm trying to figure out who we owe money to, we entered a bill and we owe money, we can go here, we get a nice breakout here. We can go to reports that we'll see reports that will break out who we owe and how old the thing is that we owe. And we can go to the home page and we can use this pay bills feature to kind of list the bills that we owe. And that's another way that we might go in and try to figure out who we owe, when do we need to be paying them, which is going to be one of our major kind of tasks with regards to the vendor cycle.